Your mother's policy just renewed. $2 million coverage, Maxick said over the phone. His voice was casual, but something in it made my chest tighten. I was sitting in my kitchen. The morning light hadn't yet reached the window above the sink. My coffee was still steaming. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, as if distance would help me understand what my son had just said. "Why are you calling me about my insurance?" I asked. "I'm your beneficiary. You made me executor of your estate 5 years ago, remember?" I did remember. It seemed like such a simple thing at the time. Maxick was organized, responsible. He had a business degree. It made sense. I'd updated my will, signed the papers, and never thought about it again. That was the mistake. "Yes, but why does it matter that it renewed?" I pressed. There was a pause. In that silence, something shifted. A feeling I couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly. Something sharper. Something that made my fingers grip the coffee mug tighter. "Just keeping you informed," Maxick said. "You should know these things." He hung up, not rudely, just a simple goodbye, and the line went dead. I sat there in the pre-dawn kitchen, staring at my phone screen, feeling like I'd just missed something critical. The kind of thing that changes everything once you finally see it. I set the phone down on the granite counter. My hand stayed there for a moment longer than necessary. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, that particular wrongness that comes from a conversation that doesn't quite add up. Maxick never called about administrative details. He never called just to inform me of anything. He called when he needed money or when he wanted something. This call was different. I replayed it in my mind. The casual tone. The emphasis on the $2 million. The fact that he was my beneficiary. The way he'd said it like he was reminding me of something I should already know. Like he was testing whether I remembered. "My name is Shael Shepard, and I've been a financial advisor for 32 years. I've helped people build wealth, protect assets, plan for retirement. I've seen the best and worst of human nature when money is involved. I've watched families tear themselves apart over inheritance. I've heard stories that would make your skin crawl. But I never thought it would happen to me. I never thought my own son would be capable of what I was about to discover." I got up from the kitchen table and walked to my office. The house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband David had died 4 years ago from a heart attack. No warning, no time to say goodbye. Just one moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. After that, I'd thrown myself into work. I'd expanded my client base. I'd bought this house outright with the insurance money. I'd built a life that was mine alone. And somewhere in that process, I'd missed something crucial about my son. I opened my computer and pulled up my insurance policy documents. The file was in my secure cloud storage, encrypted and backed up. I'd learned long ago that digital security wasn't optional in my line of work. I scrolled through the policy details, reading carefully. Coverage amount, $2 million. Beneficiary, Maxick Walsh. Premium, paid annually. Status, active. Then I noticed something that made me pause. The policy had been updated 6 months ago. Not by me. The change was logged in the system with my digital signature. But I hadn't signed anything. I was certain of it. My heart started moving faster. I pulled up the access logs. Someone had logged into my insurance account from an unfamiliar IP address. The timestamp was 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was asleep. I was always asleep at that hour. I grabbed my phone and called my insurance agent. Rayalina Murphy had been helping me with my policies for 8 years. She knew my voice, my patterns, my preferences. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Shael, hi? Is everything okay?" she asked immediately. She could hear something in my voice. Panic, maybe. Urgency. I need to know if anyone has called to make changes to my policy in the last 6 months, I said. There was a pause while she looked it up. I could hear her typing. Yes, actually. Someone called about updating your beneficiary designation. We have it on record. Who called? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your son, Maxick Walsh. He said you'd asked him to handle it while you were traveling. I hadn't been traveling, and I would never ask Maxick to handle my insurance. He was my son, yes, but he was also someone I'd learned not to trust completely. He'd had money problems in his 20s. Bad decisions. He'd borrowed from me multiple times and paid back only some of it. I'd learned to keep certain things private from him. Apparently, I hadn't learned well enough. And the digital signature on the account change? I asked. That was done online, from your computer, according to our logs. I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking now. I could see what was happening. Maxick had found a way to access my accounts. He'd changed the beneficiary designation. He'd updated the policy. He'd done it carefully, methodically, like someone who'd planned this for a long time. But why? Why would he do this? The answer came to me slowly, like poison seeping through water. He wouldn't do it just to update a beneficiary. That would be too simple. Maxick didn't think in simple terms. He thought in angles and opportunities and ways to exploit situations. $2 million. That was the number he'd emphasized on the phone. Not 1 million, not 3 million, 2 million. Specific, significant, enough to change someone's life. And then I understood. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had to sit down. The office chair caught me as my legs gave out. I gripped the armrests and tried to breathe. He was going to kill me, or make it look like I killed myself. That was the only explanation that made sense. That was why he'd emphasized the policy. That was why he'd made sure he was the beneficiary. That was why he'd called to remind me it was active. He was planning to collect $2 million on my death. I sat there in my office for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind was racing through the implications. If this was true, if Maxick was actually planning something like this, then I needed to be careful. I needed to be smart. I needed to gather evidence without alerting him to what I knew. I pulled up my phone records. Maxick had called me at least once a week for the last 3 months. Before that, he'd rarely called at all. I checked my email. There were messages from him asking about my health, my mood, whether I was taking my medication. I didn't take medication. I was healthy. There was no reason for him to be asking these questions unless he was building a narrative, unless he was creating a picture of someone who was struggling, someone who might be suicidal. I opened my banking app and checked my accounts. Everything looked normal. Maxick didn't have access to my money, but he had access to my insurance information, and apparently, he had access to my computer. That meant he could access anything he wanted. The thought made my skin crawl. I needed to know how he'd gotten into my systems. I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done. I needed to know if anyone else was involved, because something this elaborate, something this calculated, didn't happen in a vacuum. Maxick wasn't smart enough to pull this off alone. He'd never been the smartest person in the room. He'd always been the one looking for shortcuts, for ways to make things easier. Someone else had to be helping him. I thought about Maxick's wife, Inaya. They'd been married for 7 years. She was quiet, observant, the kind of person who noticed things. She'd always been polite to me, but distant. I'd never felt a real connection with her. Now I wondered if that distance was intentional, if she was part of this. I pulled up my calendar and looked at the times Maxick had called. Most of them were early morning or late evening, times when I might be alone, times when I might be vulnerable. One call had come at 2 a.m., another at 11:45 p.m. They weren't random, they were strategic. I opened my computer's security settings and checked for any unauthorized software. There it was, buried in my system files, hidden so well that I almost missed it, a keylogger. Someone had installed a program that recorded every keystroke I made, every password I entered, every email I read, every search I performed. That's how they'd gotten into my insurance account. That's how they'd accessed my digital signature. That's how they'd gotten into my banking information. They'd been watching everything I did for months. I felt sick. I felt violated. I felt like someone had been standing in my house, invisible, watching me, taking notes, planning. I needed to think clearly. I needed to figure out what to do next. Going to the police seemed like the obvious choice, but what would I tell them? That my son had updated my insurance beneficiary? That wasn't a crime. That I'd found a keylogger on my computer? That could be explained away? That he'd called me and said something suspicious? That wasn't evidence of anything. I needed proof. Real proof. Evidence that would hold up in court. Evidence that would show clear intent. I decided to set a trap. I created a new email account using a fake name and a new browser that Maxick wouldn't have access to. I sent myself messages about my plans to travel to a remote location. I mentioned a specific date and time. I made it sound like I was going somewhere isolated, somewhere where no one would find me for days. Then I waited. The response came within hours. An email from an address I didn't recognize, but that I could trace back to a computer at an internet cafe 3 blocks from Maxick's office. The message was simple. Sounds good. We'll take care of everything while you're gone. We, not I, we. That confirmed there were at least 2 people involved. I printed out the email and saved it to an encrypted drive. I documented everything. The keylogger, the unauthorized policy changes, the suspicious phone calls, the email response. I created a timeline showing how the plan had developed over the last 6 months. Then I did something that surprised me. Instead of going to the police immediately, I called Maxick. "Hey, Mom," he answered on the first ring. He always answered on the first ring when I called. Always eager, always ready. "What's up?" "I wanted to talk to you about something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've been thinking about making some changes to my insurance." There was a pause. I could almost hear him processing this information, calculating what it meant. "Really? What kind of changes?" he asked carefully. "I'm thinking about increasing the coverage, maybe adding some additional policies. I want to make sure everything is in order. You know, in case anything happens to me." "That's a great idea," Maxick said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I think that's really smart, actually. Have you thought about who you want the beneficiary to be?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "I wanted to talk to you about it. What do you think?" "Well, I'm your son. It would make sense for me to be the beneficiary. I can help manage everything if something happens to you." There it was, the confirmation I needed. He'd basically admitted to it right there. Not in so many words, but the implication was clear. He wanted to be the beneficiary. He wanted to manage the money if something happened to me. "I'll think about it," I said. "Don't think too long," Maxick said, and something in his voice changed. It became harder, more urgent. "These things are important. You never know what could happen." I hung up after that. I couldn't trust myself to keep my voice steady any longer. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, every door locked, and my phone in my hand. I'd called a lawyer, Eileen Bell, who specialized in family law and fraud cases. I'd sent her all the evidence I'd gathered. She'd called me back within an hour. "This is serious," she'd said. "This is attempted fraud at minimum, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, possibly more depending on what else we find." "What do I do?" I'd asked. "First, we go to the police. We file a report. We get them involved. Second, we secure all your accounts. We change all your passwords. We get your computer cleaned by a professional. Third, we file for a restraining order against your son." A restraining order against my own son. The words felt surreal, but they also felt necessary. The police report took 3 hours. I sat in a small room at the precinct and told Detective Haleyna Tucker everything I'd found. The keylogger, the unauthorized policy changes, the emails, the phone calls, the entire carefully constructed plan to make my death look like suicide and collect my insurance money. Detective Tucker took notes. She asked questions. She didn't seem surprised. She'd probably seen worse. People did terrible things for money every single day. "We'll need to bring your son in for questioning," she said. "We'll also need to get a warrant to search his computer and his phone." "How long will that take?" I asked. "A few days, maybe a week. We need to build the case carefully. We need to make sure we have enough evidence to charge him." A week? That felt like a long time to wait. A long time to wonder if he was planning something else. A long time to be afraid in my own home. But I did wait. I changed all my passwords. I got my computer professionally cleaned. I had new locks installed on my doors. I hired a security system company to install cameras throughout my house. I did everything Eileen recommended, and then I waited for the police to do their job. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Detective Tucker asked me to come to the station. She said they'd found enough evidence to bring charges against Maxick and Anaya. They'd found communications between the two of them discussing the plan. They'd found the keylogger software on Maxick's work computer. They'd found emails discussing the timing and logistics of how they would stage my suicide. The details were chilling. They'd planned to make it look like I'd taken pills. They'd researched which medications would be most believable. They'd discussed leaving a note. They'd even discussed what would happen after. How they'd grieve. How they'd manage the money. How they'd live their lives after collecting the insurance. It was all there. All documented. All waiting to be presented to a jury. The trial took 4 months. 4 months of sitting in a courtroom and listening to my son's plan to kill me be laid out in clinical detail. 4 months of watching lawyers argue about evidence and motive and intent. 4 months of seeing Maxick sit at the defendant's table, his face expressionless, as his life fell apart. Anaya testified against him. She'd decided to take a plea deal in exchange for her cooperation. She described how Maxick had first approached her with the idea. How he'd said his mother had so much money and he deserved to inherit it. How he'd convinced her that my death would be a mercy because I was lonely and sad after my husband died. How he'd convinced her that taking the insurance money was justified because I would want him to be happy. It was all lies, of course. But it was the kind of lie that people tell themselves when they want to do something terrible. It was the kind of lie that makes evil seem reasonable. On the final day of the trial, the jury returned a verdict. Guilty on all counts: attempted fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, insurance fraud, all guilty. The judge sentenced Maxick to 12 years in prison. Anaya got 5 years with the possibility of parole after 2. I sat in the courtroom and watched my son be led away in handcuffs. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not relief, not even anger. Just a deep, hollow sadness that my own child had been capable of this. After the trial, I did what I should have done long ago. I updated my will. I removed Maxick as executor. I changed my beneficiaries. I left my money to charity, to organizations that helped people in crisis, to research into mental health, to programs that supported families dealing with addiction and financial strain. I didn't want my money to be a curse. I didn't want it to be something that destroyed families or motivated terrible acts. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to help people instead of hurt them. I also did something else. I reached out to Anaya's family. They'd been devastated by her arrest. Her parents were elderly, her siblings struggling. I helped them with legal fees. I made sure they knew it wasn't their fault. I made sure they knew that sometimes people make terrible choices, and sometimes those choices have consequences, but that didn't mean the entire family was responsible. It took time, but eventually, I found peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting. That kind of peace doesn't exist. But the kind of peace that comes from surviving something terrible and choosing to move forward anyway. I continued working as a financial advisor. I started offering free consultations to families dealing with financial strain. I started teaching workshops about financial security and protecting yourself from fraud. I used my experience to help others avoid what I'd almost experienced. Years later, I received a letter. It was from Maxick, writing from prison. He apologized. He said he'd had time to think about what he'd done. He said he understood how terrible it was. He said he was sorry. I didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some relationships, once broken, can't be fixed. Some betrayals are too profound to forgive. But I didn't hate him either. I pitied him. I pitied the fact that he'd had so little self-worth that he thought the only way to matter was to take what belonged to someone else. I pitied the fact that he'd been so afraid of being ordinary that he'd been willing to commit murder to feel important. And I learned something from it all. I learned that the people closest to us are sometimes the most dangerous. I learned that love and trust can be weaponized by those who don't understand their value. I learned that vigilance isn't paranoia when there are actually people plotting against you. Most importantly, I learned that surviving doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means building something new, something stronger, something that honors what you've been through while refusing to be defined by it. I'm 61 years old now. I've been a financial advisor for 35 years. I've helped hundreds of clients protect their assets and plan for their futures. I've also helped law enforcement catch fraud and white-collar crime. I've testified as an expert witness in cases involving financial conspiracy. My house is still secure. My accounts are still protected. My passwords are still changed regularly. I'm still cautious. I'm still vigilant. But I'm also still living. I'm still working. I'm still helping people. And I never, ever take my security for granted. If you're watching someone closely, if you're noticing patterns that don't quite add up, if you're feeling that instinctive wrongness that something isn't right, listen to that feeling. Trust your instincts. Because sometimes the people we love most are capable of things we never thought possible. And sometimes paying attention to the small details is what saves your life. Subscribe for the next chapter. It's worth it.